Hey students, welcome to the last lecture of the semester. You've made it this far. Congratulations. Super proud of you. We just have one final push to get through this week. And this week's topic is really pretty much miscellaneous. We're kind of wrapping up the species that we should have talked about at some point in the semester, but they somehow didn't fit into the other lectures. And as you can see, we have a special guest for this lecture. So I am very pleased to be able to introduce Anna. Anna is an educator at the Field Museum, and as you can see, she has a couple friends with her. With them, who we're gonna be talking about. So let me go ahead and share the screen. We'll get into introducing pigeons in general as a species, and then we can focus on rice and beans. Okay.
Three pigeons.
Yeah.
Boom.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Here we go. All right. So the rock pigeon is the species that everyone is used to seeing. And in fact, students at LaBaugh Woods the other week, remember we were seeing the big flocks of birds flying and they looked so graceful and they had those really pointed wings. Those were rock pigeons. And it's hard to match that like graceful flight with what we imagine pigeons as being, where they walk on the ground and they look kind of all awkward and weird, but they actually fly really beautifully. So these are really easily identified. You probably already know this species. They have really variable coloration, but generally they have this little white spot above their beak and they have pink legs. So let me actually exit out of the screen share again so that you can see our guests.
Yeah, so this is Bean, who is a pigeon. So Bean doesn't have those like iconic two bars on the wings, but like is some checkered-ish blue pigeon. People that like humans have bred pigeons a lot, so there's a lot of different special color variations and a lot of names for them, and I do not know most of them. But yeah.
That's all right. They were one of the first. Actually, in my evolution class, we talk about pigeons because they were the first like purposely domesticated for their aesthetics species rather than for their function. And so Darwin actually talked about pigeons because there were all these fancy pigeons in Europe that were all crazy. So tell us more about how you got beans and what the situation is.
Yeah, so I was at an event where like a nature expo that a high school organized, and then there was a table with pigeons on it, and I was very fascinated. I'm like, why does this table have pigeons? I want to go talk to them. And then I discovered the Chicago Pigeon Pet Rescue, which is now called the Great Lakes Pigeon Rescue because that's like the whole area they serve. Because pigeons are historically a domestic species, they're essentially all feral, unlike other wild birds. So many of them have adapted to living in human areas after people brought them there. Which is why you see pigeons in cities more so than like in a meadow or a forest preserve or something like that. But they find pigeons that have injuries or that are fancy breeds of pigeons or meat breeds of pigeons, like king pigeons that are bigger, that have been dumped or have gotten lost or injured. And sometimes pigeons like will follow people. So sometimes people are like, this pigeon is like followed me across the street and is now like in my garage and it's been there for 2 weeks. And I called you because I don't know, I feel like it's looking for help and I don't know what to do.
Oh.
They collect all of those pigeons and try to rehome them if they are best suited for human life because they either have injuries, and both of my pigeons have wing injuries, so they can't fly super well. They're, I don't know, Bean's pretty springy, so she can like jump really high and flap a lot. But like if there was a predator situation, she would not be able to get away. Neither could Rice. Rice is on the floor. He may come up later.
So this rescue is trying to get the pigeons to be re-released into the wild, but if they can't, they'll find a foster home.
And most of the ones they find and like deal with cannot. They focus on the ones that are not meant to go back into the wild because there's other places like Willowbrook that do a lot of wildlife rehab, and so they're like, oh, this is a racing pigeon. It has like bands on its leg. Oh, this is like a white poofy fancy pigeon. This is not doing so well. Especially if like birds are emaciated and like not finding sufficient food outside. There's a lot of signs of like you are not succeeding outdoors. And so those are most of the pigeons that they work with. And they have a Facebook page with lots of cute pictures, and people foster or forever adopt these pigeons. So
Perfect.
My, quarantine hobby now is taking care of these pigeons.
Yeah, that's exciting. What's it like living with them? What do they eat? What's their life like?
Yeah, so they eat seeds, and on the one hand it's like very simple food, and on the other hand it's very messy because they're dumb, not dumb. They just like fling it around a lot, which I make fun of them for. Um, but they're like pretty easy to keep in like a large dog crate. I let them walk around because they can't fly. That is useful for me so that like if they walk around and poop, it's easy to clean up because it's on the floor. They do make pigeon pants, which are like diapers for people that want
Oh my gosh.
where the poop goes. So if I take them to my parents, if I ever go back to Dangertown, Indiana, then I bring their pants because it's a lot of carpet floor. But pigeon poop is also very interesting and not that hard to clean, and worse outdoors when they have a bread-based diet, and it like makes it more concrete like and acidic, and it can do architectural damage. So as far as people that are mad at them being in cities, architectural damage is like kind of a valid reason, but it's made much worse by the fact that they're eating like an improper diet, because they should just be eating like seeds and millet and stuff, but not human foods. Human foods makes their poop worse. So
So does their poop look like seeds? Like is it grainy?
it's sometimes it's not exactly grainy, and it depends on like what they've eaten. Like if they just drink water, their poop will just be like a weird puddle or like a puddle with some little speckly things in it, which is interesting. But usually it's like a small green blob. But they're very water soluble.
That's interesting. So we haven't really talked about this in this class, but in Bio 202, which all the students have taken, they learned about how basically how bird poop and pee all comes out the cloaca, the one hole. My PhD advisor used to say the cloaca is for pee and poo and lovin' too, and that has never left my head.
It's a good
But
rhyme.
it is, it really is. But it's this concentrated urea. So rather than being separate urine and feces, you have this uric acid and urea compound. So that's interesting to hear about how it doesn't look like what you imagined bird poop to look like. I guess it's not the
Yeah,
white with the black spot.
yeah. The like super white poop I think is more is like not, I should double check because a lot of people that keep pigeons, there's like a lot of pigeon communities on the internet, and they talk about all the pigeon things including poop, because as with any animal and people, like poop can be a good health indicator.
Mm-hmm.
Like white poop is like a thing that you do not want a amount of in your captive pigeons. I'm sure at some point I can like move around my apartment and zoom in on poop on the floor. So be there.
I don't think the students are as into talking about animal scat as I have been, but it's such a good indicator of health and what
It's
wildlife is around, and like it's really useful.
so good for research. It's full of secrets. It's got all the DNA and the hormones. Poop is good for science.
That's a really good way to put it. Do you listen to the Ologies podcast at all?
I have not like all of it. There's so
Yeah,
much, but I
there's
listened
so
to
much.
several of them.
There's one on scatology about it's somebody who works at a zoo. I can't remember her name. And she just has freezers full of poop from the animals at the zoo, and she just uses it to assess their health and do all sorts of cool research. But anyways, so what does it mean if you see a pigeon in a flock that has a band on its leg?
So that means that it at some point lived with people, because a lot of other birds, the bands are like some type of wildlife monitoring.
Right.
The pigeon, it is not. No one is monitoring, to my knowledge. Maybe there should be more studies of like urban pigeons, but
Yeah.
this was a kept pigeon, usually a racing pigeon, especially. Um,
Okay.
because that's like people that like breed racing pigeons, it's like very serious, and like you want to keep track of your birds and their genes and like get them back and stuff like that. Or sometimes not. Sometimes if their bird has like not made it back, it's like, oh, you're a failure, never come home. So it depends on the people, and there's a lot of there's a very big split between like the pigeon racing community and the pigeon rescue community, because a lot of pigeon racing is like very strenuous and like not good for pigeon health. So if you see a pigeon with a band on, it's like some of them have completely assimilated into wild flocks and are like living their best life, found a lover, are just like,
Mhm.
you know, doing great. But sometimes it can be like a pigeon that is like, I don't know what's happening. I am lost. So if you do see one with a band, feel free to think about its life and possible backstory. And if you think it's not doing well, you can hop around on the internet and find those pigeon rescue phone numbers and let them know that you found that. And they could try to find somebody to try to pick it up, or they might ask you to try to pick it up if you've got time.
Yeah. That's interesting. And so it sounds like that's really similar to like the horse racing community, where like horse racing, the thing a lot of people are into, but it's really strenuous, bordering on abusive to the animals. And then you have the horse rescue community who are like, we have to exist because of this racing community. It sounds like I don't want to anger a lot of people, but like it's I'm anti-racing. There's a turtle racing community too, interestingly.
I didn't know there was like, I know there's like the fun one where they just like track them and you just like, I didn't know there was like a race one.
So I guess I shouldn't group it because the turtle racing community is a lot less harmful from what I understand and a lot smaller. It really is like you have the two circles and you just see which turtle can make it to the outside. But there's a bar actually in Lincoln Square that has turtle races. And they're red-eared sliders, which are an invasive species, and they don't look great from what I've seen. But anyways, that's getting off on a side topic because that's what I know. Okay, so until just a second ago, we were hearing cooing going on in the background.
Yeah, and that's the other pigeon, not the one on my hand, but Rice. So the cooing in general is like to talk to each other a lot of the time. Rice is very needy and very sweet and loving and really likes Bean and wants to talk to Bean and be with Bean all the time. And Bean does her own thing and is like, I don't know, Anna's got some snacks and important meetings, so I think I'm gonna hang out over here. And Rice could also come here if he wanted to, and he might eventually. He's an explorer. He likes to use up more of the apartment and like stare in mirrors more.
Oh, that's interesting.
A little more food centric and like, nope, I know what I want in life, and it's only snacks.
And pigeons don't pass the mirror test, right? Do you know the mirror test?
Yeah, they do not.
Okay.
I don't think so.
I'm just interested. Students,
But
the
they
mirror
enjoy
test.
it.
Oh yeah, well, who doesn't?
They enjoy mirrors. They do not like excel at discovering things, but they just like to stare at the other birds.
That's funny. The mirror test is a test that I know elephants pass it. I think dolphins do. I'm not sure what other species, but basically you have to like
primates,
a
like
lot of
chimps and
primates.
gorillas. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. You have to like indiscreetly put a spot on the animal's head or some area where they can see in the mirror. And then the test is you let the animal look in the mirror, and if they recognize like there's something on that animal's head, which is my head, and so they'll reach up and feel it, then you know that they understand what a mirror is and that they're looking at themselves. So it's really this really simple test for like a complex idea. It's really beautiful. So yeah, so pigeons don't know that. So they just think they're looking at another pigeon, and that's adorable.
Yeah.
So will it upset them if I play other pigeon calls? Because I was gonna.
Probably not.
Okay.
We'll see.
Okay, well, I'm gonna go back to the screen. If you think of if other things pop up, let me know.
Okay.
Stuff to say. Okay. Can you see the screen again?
Yeah.
Okay. So here's one call. Any response from them?
Rice is coming over.
Oh, good.
They have also sometimes responded when like if I saw a bird outside, I'm trying to figure it out what it was at home. I'll use like the Audubon app and play different calls, and like my cat and my two birds are like, "What is this bird?" I'm like, sorry.
My dogs do that too, especially with teaching this class where I've been playing bird calls all the time. When I don't have my headphones in, the dogs just freak out. They're like, "Why is there birds in the house?" It's very funny. Okay, so that was like the traditional coo, and we've been hearing the coo. There's one other sound. Let's listen to that one. So that one sounds a little bit more like intense. Is that for a different reason? Do you know? Do you ever hear that one?
I am not an expert on pigeon cooing, but I would agree that it does sound more intense. I don't know exactly what it means.
Is that Rice doing it right now?
That's Rice right now, yeah.
Oh, so Rice is imitating the one that we just heard.
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. I hope we didn't alert him.
I think he just is a mystery creature. It's also really cute if he comes over later and does it, like they just inflate so much while they're cooing, which is like very cute.
That's interesting.
Oh, yeah, I don't know what that thing is called. It reminds me of a frog or like a howler monkey, but like they're very funny looking.
Yeah, I have no idea what that's called in birds. That's interesting. Cool. I have one more question as someone who is really interested in coloration. Why do pigeons have iridescence? Do you know? Why is it?
That is a good question, and I don't exactly know. And iridescence in general is like very fun and interesting, and we see it more in like scales and feathers than we do in hair,
Yeah.
right? So I don't know, but a lot of birds seem to have a lot of fun visual features, um, suggesting that fun visual focus in life, but I have no idea what its function may be or may not be.
Are they sexually dimorphic at all?
No, they're pretty similar. And that's an interesting thing too, because like the racing pigeon community, like you can have like male or female racers, which is cool.
That is cool. Um, so that's interesting because normally when we see color in birds, it's because of it's some sort of sexual signal, and you can kind of tell that because the males and females are going to look different with that. But with pigeons, they all have some degree of iridescence, as far as I know. Um, and there is another theory about iridescence that it's in birds that live in large groups as some form of social signaling. And there's like one theory I read, I think it might have been starlings, that starlings have it because it helps them with their murmurations when they're in their big groups. Having the color change as the light changes helps them change direction.
Yeah, like with the angles and like angle, that's really cool. I
I don't
like
think that's been tested. I think that's just like an idea, but I wonder if the same could be true for pigeons.
I could imagine that because they do often like fly in big groups, so I could imagine that.
Yeah. So do they have like a social structure in those big groups, or how are rice and beans doing with just you and the cat as their family? Like, does that?
Yeah, it's a funny time. So I don't know a ton about like the bigger groups and group dynamics, but like in general they do like make pairs and like stay as a pair unless like somebody dies. But as with a lot of animal pairs, there's like extra pair copulations because that's
Mhm.
what they do. But I know, oh my God. With the cat, it's interesting because Bean is much more comfortable with me than she is with the cat, and Rice is the opposite. Rice doesn't really care about the cat and treats her as like a neutral, equal thing, and is like a much more skittish of me. Like we'll still come over eventually, maybe, especially because there's food involved. Um, and that could be different too about their like histories, which I don't know completely. Bean was a racing pigeon. Rice is a fancy pigeon, so he's white and like speckly. Rice, you're so close. Come up here so we can see you, please. Look, I have treats. It'll be really fun. Think about it. Think about it. We'll maybe come up later.
Okay.
But yeah, so I don't know what they're, and that's, true with like dogs or any animal that lives with people, like
Mhm.
these pasts can change behavior things. Um, but luckily the cat has not tried to eat them, and they actually are really obsessed with her litter box, which I don't know what that's about. And I don't know if those like, what is that? The thing in cat poop that makes mice do more risk-taking behavior. I don't know if
Toxo.
that's affecting them, and they're like getting high in the litter box and feeling all powerful or what, but they love hanging out in the litter box, which I think is Rice's favorite, and Bean just goes there because he's there. But it's really annoying, and the cat will not chase them out of it. I have to take them out of it so that she can go to the bathroom.
Could
So
it be because they're attracted to the litter? Like, do they think it's seeds, or they think it's what's the thing that the grit that they eat to help break down food?
yeah, so they don't eat it, so that's
That's
good.
good. Yeah.
But and it might, I think they do like the substrate, and it's hard because I've tried to like, okay, well, let's have a different box just for you and I'll put cat litter in it, but then the cat pees in that box too, because like, oh, this is cat litter, I know what this is for.
Right.
So I don't know if I should just like buy them sand or like what kind of weird hobbies they may have.
Oh my
um, they do like to explore, and I like cut up a lot of different like paper and cardboard, and they use that to like build nest spaces out of, which is fun. They like
God, that is
collecting crap
awesome.
pretty much to make a nest.
Aw, that's so cute. Um, I have this fun little meme, and I wanted your professional opinion on its truth. Um, so, students, wood pigeons are one of the common species you might see if you leave the U.S. So this is not a species that we have here, certainly not in Chicago, but it just compares the wood pigeon and the rock pigeon, which are two pretty common species, and I thought it was funny. Especially this
That
part
is,
where it says rock pigeons live in every city and probably on every planet.
I love this. This is very cute.
Good. Is it true that either Bean or Rice's favorite actor is Dwayne the Rock Johnson?
I think Bean likes Dwayne the Rock Johnson. I think Bean thinks that she is Dwayne the Rock Johnson.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know. I feel like Rice likes what's her name? Emma Watson. I
Oh,
feel
okay.
Rice is a very soft boy.
Very interesting.
Buddy.
Okay, so the next species I want to talk a little bit about is the wild turkey. And I know we're a week late for this. Thanksgiving was last week when this lecture is posted. But I do want to talk about this species because they're becoming increasingly common in cities. And I know that seems really wild. I don't know how many of you have even seen wild turkeys, but they are big. They stand out. They look like what you'd expect them to do. They're very turkey-like. But these are different from the domestic turkeys that you'll often see pictures of or see them in the farms with the really like intricate tail feathers. These guys have the tails that they can fan out, but they're not nearly as colorful as a lot of the domestic ones. An interesting thing about the wild turkey is that it can fly. A lot of people don't realize that. It doesn't fly at like great heights or anything, but they will use their wings to get up into trees. They'll fly short bursts and short distances. And in fact, they roost in trees. I did a quick iNaturalist search just to see how common wild turkey sightings are in Chicago, and it was kind of way more than I expected. They have been seen in the city all over the place, and to the point that they're becoming a problem in a lot of other urban areas. So areas of California and areas in New England have had to come up with special hunting seasons basically to reduce the turkey populations because turkeys can be really aggressive. Think like a Canada goose. But they'll come into areas, they'll hang out by people's cars, they'll roost in the trees in your front yard. And they tend to be in groups. So they can really be an issue in suburban and urban environments. They've also been known to cause car accidents because of crossing roads and people trying to avoid hitting them. So there is reason to control their population. In Chicago, and in fact, I have this link here to this McHenry County video about the reintroduction of turkeys because they were almost extinct for a while in the US, but especially in the Midwest. And efforts were taken to increase their population, which succeeded. And now we're kind of dealing with this almost overpopulation problem in certain areas. So McHenry County did this nice video with some fun turkey facts. And there's an article here if you're interested in reading more about what turkeys in an urban or suburban environment actually mean. In general, there aren't a whole lot of field marks here because they're really pretty unique looking. They're going to be large bodied. They have a dark color, but they kind of vary from black to brown to, they actually have some of that little iridescence too. Some of that greenish is not nearly as much as even the pigeons, but they have a little bit. And yeah, let's listen to what their calls sound like. So very classic gobbly turkey sounding. Did the pigeons react to that?
They didn't really react as much to that one, which was like disappointing to me. I reacted to that. I love the sound.
It's very funny, and you'll in that clip we heard multiple individuals too. That was a group of them. And let's listen to the slightly different other call. That sounded really similar. Oh no, I always have this issue. There we go, where it plays when I don't want it to. So they have kind of a wide range of vocalizations, from those kind of really high pitched squeals to the actual gobble to all these kind of squawkiness in between. Have you ever seen a wild turkey in Chicago, Anna?
I haven't in Chicago, but so we actually are doing a Wild Chicago program for the Field Museum later today.
Hmm.
Talking about turkeys and like wondering, it's like, oh, we should look up like how close to the city they live. Because we have people like in our department that live in Elmhurst that have like seen them in their neighborhood and stuff like that. But I've seen them in like Boston and like other cities where I'm like, a turkey! Wow! But I
Yeah,
haven't seen them like in the middle of Chicago yet. But they're so fun. I'd love to see them anywhere.
I think give them time. Like they really like the parks. Like they're gonna try to stick mostly to the forest preserves and the parks, but they might come out looking for food or whatever. I don't know. So we'll see what happens in future years. Very cool. Okay. The next species I want to talk about, most of you students have seen because we've seen these at during our field experiences. This is the downy woodpecker, the Coides pubescens. You're probably already able to ID this one, which is great, but it's got the black and white body. The males have this red spot on their head where the females don't have the red spot. And I want to try to show you some of the ways to differentiate the downy woodpecker from the hairy woodpecker. Most of the times in our field experiences, we just call things downies because that's kind of what I settled on. And because our binoculars weren't really strong enough to see the differences, but I want to point them out so that you can at least see them in pictures and practice IDing whether you're looking at a downy or hearing a downy or a hairy. Their actual calls are really similar. They have that high-pitched squeaking and they have kind of a chatter, which we'll listen to. But one thing that's really interesting that differentiates the downy from the hairy is their actual drumming. So when they're pecking on the wood, the downy has like slower drumming that actually you can like count. You can differentiate each individual peck, whereas the hairy has really a fast like buzz. Like you can't tell one peck from another. So that's one cool and interesting kind of when you think about the physiology of it, right? A drum isn't the same as a call. It's not a vocalization. It's a byproduct of their behavior. And to the fact that they have such different behavior and they're both woodpeckers, presumably eating the same diet in the same types of environments, is pretty interesting. Um, so let's listen to what the downy woodpecker calls. Again, you all have heard this in the woods, so it should be familiar. Remember that chirp? You're hearing crows in the background. And there was that kind of chatter at the end that we heard sometimes. And contrast this to the hairy. So again, we have the hairy woodpecker has this black and white body. The males have the red spot, so they look really similar. The main difference here is going to be in the bill size. So the hairy woodpecker bill is almost as big, as wide as the head, or as long as the head. So if you can get a good look at the bill, that can help you ID it. And again, if you can hear the drumming. So let's listen to the calls. There is a slight difference in calls. The birding guide says you can tell the difference in the calls because the hairy is higher pitched. I don't hear it. I can't. They sound the same to me. Anna, as you're, let's see if this sounds different to you or not. Maybe.
I'll try.
Okay. Would you be able to tell the difference between that chirp and the one from before?
No, not right now. Maybe if I like really practiced trying to tell them apart, but nope.
I couldn't either, and I have practiced. So here's a little bit of the chatter of the hairy, just so you can hear. So the chatter is a little bit different, but you don't always hear that, right? You're more likely to hear the chirp than the chatter. So here's a side-by-side, of what the downy and the hairy look like. So this really helps you see that bill difference. So we've talked in this class a lot about how size is a really poor field mark. It's really frustrating to when bird guides and all the guides say this one's smaller than this one. It's like how likely is it that I'm going to have both in front of me to actually see that? But in some cases, it's kind of unavoidable. So this is one of those where I like to think of it as the hairy bill is like as long as the head, whereas the downy one is much shorter than the head. If you were to like flip that backwards, it'd only go to the eye, where if you were to flip that backwards, it would go back here, right? So if you can get a good look at the bill, that can help you ID whether you're talking about the downy or the hairy. Have you seen these guys, Anna? Oh,
Sorry. I've seen I've seen one of them. I think I've seen a downy woodpecker.
yeah.
But I really like that beak to head size reference because that's like something you can use easily if you only can see one.
Right. Yeah, and that's the only way that I think size measurements should work for IDing things, but that's not what the bird guides think because a lot of birders are, they get so used to seeing things that relative size becomes a really easy trait. Whereas when you're new to birding, like most of my students are, that's not really helpful, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, the next species of woodpecker, this is the one species that we haven't seen as a group yet in our field experiences, but we've talked about it. This is the red-headed woodpecker. And these are common in Chicago. They are around. They just tend to be in more open environments. So if you all remember at Gompers Park, there's like the wetland and then there was the path that was next to the wetland. And that path had like really grassy kind of rolling hills with sporadic trees. That probably would have been a good habitat for the red-headed woodpecker, but we didn't really walk through that area. So these guys are a lot larger than the downy or the hairy. They're much more like a crow size, maybe a little smaller than a crow, but bigger than sparrows and bigger than house sparrows or whatever. But they have a solid red head in both male and female, so they're not sexually dimorphic. And then they have these solid black and white colors. So even though they have the same core colors as the other species, the patterning is really distinctive because they're from the neck up red and then this dark big black patch and a big white patch. So let's listen to what the red-headed woodpecker sounds like. You may have heard this one before. So we got a little bit of everything in that. We heard the chirps, we heard the chatter, and we heard the drum at the very end, which was the actual pecking. Okay. Oh, sorry. What were you saying?
Bird calls are just cool. I really like that one.
They're fun. Okay, this last woodpecker is one that we have seen, and we just saw it at La Ball last week. Is the red-bellied woodpecker. Remember, we talked about how this name is very confusing. It's stupid that it's called the red-bellied woodpecker because the first thing you notice is the red head. But there already is the red-headed woodpecker, and this one has a slightly redder belly than that red-headed woodpecker. So it's called the red-bellied woodpecker, even though its belly is not red at all. It's maybe a tinge of orange, but that's it. It's really tan. So we saw this one again. This is the same size as the red-headed woodpecker, but it has this like black and white striped or checkered or whatever pattern instead of the solid patches. And it's not a solid red head, right? It just has this red or orange stripe down the back. And the stripe is much bigger and much more obvious than on the downy or the hairy males, where you just have the tiny red dot. So let's listen to these guys. And we got to hear this chatter at La Bas the other week. Yeah. So those are probably familiar calls. Now, hopefully, you'll have a better chance of IDing them and looking for the woodpeckers when you hear the calls. Okay, so that was it for the bird species I want to talk about. We just have 2 more species to cover for this week, or for this semester rather, because this is the very end. And these are 2 species that you probably have seen somewhere in Chicago if you lived in the city for a while. We actually have 3 species of cockroach in Chicago, but the third isn't as common, so we're just going to talk about the 2 most common ones, and that's the German cockroach and the American cockroach. So the German cockroach is the smaller of the 2, and these guys can be ID'd by these 2 black stripes on the back of behind their head. So these are always going to be present. Their color is pretty variable. They're usually a brownish, but they can be gray or black. So you're really going to look for those 2 black stripes. And then the American cockroach is a lot bigger. This is the darker one, and way larger. And the way to ID this is with this shape on the back of their head that is a figure 8. Though really it just looks like 2 spots, but you can think of it as a figure 8 too. So they've got these 2 kind of dark blotches behind their head rather than the stripes. Both of these cockroaches, I purposely chose pictures of them in their natural habitats, because though they are well adapted to live with humans, they do naturally live outside. However, they're both introduced to the US. So even though we have this one called the American cockroach, it was introduced in like the 1600s. So this brings up this really interesting question that we talked about last week of when does an invasive species stop being considered invasive, and when do we acknowledge it as just being, now it just lives here? And this is one of those that is probably at that point where it's been in the US since the 1600s. We call it the American cockroach, even though it came from Northern Africa. But it has established, it's become a part of the ecosystem now for the most part. However, both these species of cockroaches much prefer human habitat because they love eating human food and lots of high starch, high sugar content things. And so they will choose to be near human foods. Anna, have you heard that stuff about cockroaches like being able to survive the nuclear holocaust?
Yes.
So there is some truth to that, but here's the wild thing. Cockroaches, even though they can survive high amounts of radiation, they could survive periods of starvation, they can go a long time without water, although they prefer to be near water. What they can't survive is cold. They don't like cold. Isn't that interesting?
That's interesting. What do they do in the winter?
They come to human houses.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's why we see way more of them in the winter. In the outside, they might actually, even if you have them in your basement or something, they'll move out to the yards and spend their time outside in the summer, and then in the winter they come back inside because they really don't like being cold.
It's like all those memes, like if you're cold, they're cold, bring them inside. But cockroaches.
Exactly. Cockroaches can be disease vectors. They can carry salmonella on their feet, and especially if they're in contact with foodstuffs, human foods, that's a problem. So they are considered a health risk. Also, both these species give off a odor when they're startled, and that odor can also flavor food, which I was like, thanks, I didn't need to know that fact. So you could taste if your food has made contact with cockroaches, I guess, which I don't like
That's
thinking about.
interesting.
Yeah, like it makes me think, are there like people in the health department who are like, let me sample this and see? Probably not, but that would be one way of determining if there is a cockroach problem. Okay, so those are all the species I want to talk about today. But Anna, I was hoping we could spend a little bit of time talking about you and your career and how you
Yes.
got to be an educator at the Field Museum and what that even means. And all the students in my class, I think all of them are biology majors, and so they may be considering similar careers. So,
Yeah.
what do you have
I,
to say?
I will tell you things. Also, we finally got guest star Rice.
Wow,
That's what Rice looks like. He is the fancy boy.
Rice is a fancy boy. Oh
He
my
is a
gosh.
fancy and silly boy. And yeah, Bean has just been like crawling all over my body, and Rice is just like, I don't know, but I like this seed. So
His beak is so interesting. Like I didn't expect the beak to like be the same color as the face, you know?
yeah, yeah. And it's really lovely, like you talked about the iridescence, because like all those dark spots, so like kind of black gray, is also iridescent. So like
Oh,
so beautiful. He's so
yeah.
fancy. I'm a fancy boy. But I can also talk about myself with
I
this picture
mean,
rolling
there we
around.
go. That's
There we
perfect.
go. Now everybody's in the frame. Good
Yeah.
job, team. Um, so my background was in anthropology, but I really liked animals. So I think in a different world of many different schooly things, I might have taken a different path, but because of miscellaneous hobby choices, I ended up studying anthropology because that was how I was like, oh, this is actually where the animals are. Because I thought biology was going to be a lot more medical science and like cell biology. And I started out in like zooarchaeology and like the animal bones are here.
Do you
And
know we have that in common? I
that's so cool.
I worked in a zooarchaeology lab my whole undergrad career.
That's so
Oh my
fun.
gosh. Okay, sorry. Go on.
Yeah. The Zoark is really cool. And I was like, wow, 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 animal bones are so
I have
fun.
my zooarchaeology book. I've got them all right here. Sorry.
That's so cute.
You never
Yeah,
meet
because like
other zooarchaeologists. It's
I
exciting.
just like have a bunch. Well, like I took a class, but like I just have a bunch of bones and stuff because
Nice.
they're fun. But yeah, so I was like, wow, this is really fun. But like I had to take the general requirements for anthropology, which included what did we call it? Intro to Human Evolution, which then like got into primates, starting out in like fossils, but like getting up to primates. Then we're going to the zoo and we're talking about how they research like the behavior of gorillas and monkeys and gibbons and all these things. I'm like, oh, just kidding. These animals are alive. This is what I actually want to do. So that was really exciting. And so I just kept taking like primate behavior centric things. And it was very fun. And I also was volunteering in museums usually in the summer, except for one summer I did like behavioral research fieldwork in Peru and like was following monkeys and picking up poop because poop is a gold mine of information. But it was so stressful to like the whole like goal of life was to look for like little brown pieces of crap in a world of like a lot of brown crap because you're outside. And I was just like, fieldwork is really cool and important. And I like knowing how it works and I like talking to people how it works. But I don't know if I can do this for my life because it's stressful and scary to be like, if I don't find poop, am I a failure? So that was an interesting time. Oh, hello, Rice. He's
Yay.
oh, what a fancy boy. But yeah, so I really liked animals and animal things. I came out of school. I also like did a lot of art classes and like had a second. What did I even do? I have 2 art minors or something. But I went to an internship doing animal behavior research at Disney World right after. It did research on both animal stuff and guest experiences. We were like also following people and recording how long they looked at different animals on the trail and whether or not they were doing the conservation activities and researching the guest experience and doing some of the like educational things we would do. I was like very inspired by that and felt very connected to that type of work. So I was like, oh, I like knowing how research works, but I'd rather talk to people and explain things to them and like go on a journey of discovery together.
Yeah.
Then I started working in museums. I started working at the Orlando Science Center and a skeleton museum that is now gone. There used to be the satellite location of the Museum of Osteology, which is in Oklahoma City. They made a location in Orlando, but it's closed now. But it used to be, and I used to work there. And they have so many animal skeletons. It's very fun. But yeah, and then I got a job at the Field Museum. And at the Orlando Science Center, it was a lot of education, but it was less connected to animals because it was more general science, similar to the Museum of Science and Industry, if you're familiar with that in Chicago. So it was like that on a lower budget, but we had like fire and electricity and space and planets. I learned more about the solar system than I had in a long time. And then I saw this job at the Field Museum and I was like, oh, I think I could do this thing. And sure enough, I can, and I'm here. And it's really nice because we get to be like the hype people for actual science. A lot of museums are more based in education than having a collection, especially a research collection, but the Field Museum is the opposite. We have a very small education team compared to our humongous collection and our like extensive history of research. So that's really fun and interesting. And I work in a space that like has rotating exhibits that try to highlight different research things. So that's like kind of a ramble about my professional life. And it's been really weird transitioning during this era, right? Because it was all hands-on based things. And now we're like in a plexiglass cube and now we're closed, but we'll reopen and figure it out as
Yeah.
well.
So when it's not pandemic, what's a typical day like? Are you interacting with people mostly?
So it like alternates. So some days I spend most of the day interacting with people, and some days I spend most of the day um, figuring out what we're going to do next. So I am either like talking to scientists, emailing scientists, running around the collection, being like, "Ooh, can I borrow this like mud puppy in a jar? That would be great." Um, or I'm like looking up stuff on the computer and typing up things and like cutting and laminating things and being like, "Ooh, it would be nice if we can." Make a program where we can measure these sticker footprints on the floor and figure out how fast dinosaurs walk using math. So we did that on Scratch. That was very fun.
Cool.
But yeah, so it's a lot of like development mixed with interacting with people. And some of that development is working with our content experts, which are conveniently in our building. So yeah.
That's really exciting. So what advice would you give students who might be interested in doing some sort of science outreach or similar educational path?
Yeah. So fortunately, like every museum everywhere has and needs volunteers always. And there's a lot of different ways to volunteer too. If you're not like sure how much you love to talk to people, but you love museums, a lot of museums have volunteers in collections too. Like if you're interested in specimen preparation or like cataloging. So there's definitely always a way to get involved in that capacity. And some of that stuff is even online too. There's people that are like digitizing labels online, which is very cool. And they're increasingly like there are issues in museums and in like accessibility because a lot of the entry level work is unpaid, and that is getting better. So more and more museums are getting grants that now exist to fund entry level positions. So definitely like keep an eye out for those things because they're existing more and more to like be able to be paid for working in museums, which is good because eventually you always get paid, but historically you started out having to like build up a lot of volunteer experience, which is true in a lot of fields too, like zookeeping. But getting there.
Yeah, very cool. Would it be okay if I share your contact information with my students in case
Yes,
they're
yes,
cool?
please
So
do.
students, I highly encourage you to reach out to Anna. She's a really great resource. Of course, you can always talk to me, but I only took the one career path, right? So this way you can talk to somebody on a different career path. I'm also happy to share Nikki Hale's contact information from earlier this semester. She was a wildlife biologist. She is a wildlife biologist for the city of Chicago. And we had her join us for a lecture, like much like you did, Anna, and that was very fun. So students, now you have three kind of different wildlife focused career paths you could consider following, and three different people you could talk to about that. So, or four actually. I guess we had Ali Davidge too to talk about being a field biologist. So yeah, students, please take advantage of this great opportunity. Not only this semester, but in future semesters, you now have their contact information. So please use that.
Yeah, contact me anytime. I literally don't mind. I like talking to people and figuring out stuff. Because I did apply starting out in school in engineering and architecture and like quickly ran away from both of those things. Figuring out your like career life is a mystery and it's weird. And like every adult also like has friends that have done other things. So there's a big network. We can try to find you people if you want to talk to people about various life path things.
Yeah,
We like talking about it and trying to help.
great point. Yeah, definitely. Anna, it was so nice having you today. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to Bean and Rice also.
Yes, Bean has enjoyed this Zoom call, I think.
Good. All right.